One. Excellent. And Ned, so over to you. Ned,
Yeah.
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
There we go.
Yes.
So Ned from Connecticut. I grew up in Greater Boston, and initially everybody I knew was from Greater Boston, and that was the line I descended from Robert and Mary of Boston. And I thought that was kind of the whole story, and that was where I started, of course. One of the challenges is almost everybody was named Edward, and including me. And so I spent the first couple of years just trying to sort out the Edwards. It was fun, but I'm standing, what I really wanted to talk about, I'm standing on the shoulders of Marion Reynolds, who had done all this work beforehand. So I really am not a true genealogist. I'm more of a kind of cutter and paster, because so much of the hard work had already been done. So Robert of Boston, who got there maybe 1600 to 1630, 1634, probably has several tens of thousands of descendants. I've put a lot of them onto family trees that weren't already in Robert Marion's book. So I wanted to talk about what to do when you have lots of data. How do you stay interested? What can you do with the data? How can you have fun doing genealogy? So as I said, I started out in the Boston crowd where I grew up. And we all want to find out where Robert came from. And so I thought about why DNA, and I began to think about how do I joined the project, and I think Tommy told me that we needed to find some more cousins to make our sort of DNA results more meaningful. So I went into my database, and I started with Robert in the upper corner here, and I started building out all the male descendants of Roberts by generation. So he had one son, this Captain Nathaniel, and then so forth. There were 7, I think, Nathaniels in a row. But anyway, this is a very large spreadsheet that has all the Reynolds males for 7 or 8 generations. And my goal was to get to some living Reynoldses who could take the Y-DNA test. And I managed to find several, and they're part of our little team. But as I was doing this, I discovered that at least up through the Civil War, as indicated by the color codes now on my spreadsheet, that these people didn't really move very much. They sort of, each color is a geography.
Ned?
Yeah.
Do you mean to be sharing your screen?
Yeah. Am I not sharing it?
No, you're not sharing yet.
Ah, there we go.
I see. I knew you wanted to talk a little bit before, but we don't see it yet. There should be at the bottom of your screen a green button that says share screen.
Yeah, and then
click on that. Then it'll probably give you options of different windows that you can select.
allow Zoom to well, it's giving me screen recording. Allow Zoom to.
Do you see the green share button?
Yeah, he's probably seeing a permissions request.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zoom and just say allow. Are you on a Mac or?
Yeah. Do I have to keep doing that?
Yeah, just for because it's asking permissions to see your screen and record your screen.
I'm gonna
Chris, thank you so much.
I think I'm gonna have to come up with a password.
It might just be your. Are you using a Mac or a Windows machine?
Oh boy, it's going to quit and reopen.
We could also, if you could drop the diagram into the message box or email it to me, I can pull it up and then I can share. I think you have one diagram as opposed to many presentations to go through, many slides to go through.
Yeah. So mail it to you?
Yeah, email is fine. You could potentially also drop it into the comments box. We could try either or both.
Let me, it's a PDF.
You had shared with me several weeks ago. Is that the same one?
Yeah, yep.
Got it. Yes, I will be able to find that. Aha, yes. Found it, opening. Okay, yeah, I will share my screen. Okay, folks, do you see a screen with a colorful graph? Great. Okay, Ned, if this is good, then take it away.
If you can make it any bigger, that'd be great, but that's good.
Yes.
It is an eye chart. So in any case, before I get to this graph, I started out trying to just expand the Y-DNA test group that we had. And I started looking for male descendants of Robert that were pretty far away from me, that were distant cousins, so that we'd have a more meaningful Y-DNA result. And so, as I said, I started to build out Robert's male descendants, and I got through 7 generations, which is about, let's say, 400 Reynolds males. And what I noticed was that they actually didn't move around very much, and they were in large pockets. Maybe that's not very surprising, since most of them were farmers, and they stuck to the land. But I just found it interesting to see a sort of larger group. Are you able to? The bottom of that chart is kind of,
yes.
Maybe you can make it a little smaller. I think it's that's good enough.
Yep. Okay.
So my world was that little blue line down on the bottom. That's the Boston crowd that I thought was Robert Reynolds of Boston. And I know a lot about them, and they're not that interesting. I learned fairly quickly that Robert's only son, Nathaniel, moved to Rhode Island, and he moved to Bristol, and in fact was one of the founders of Bristol. And then I got into this, and I realized that the Bristol scene was a lot bigger than Boston scene. And in the early generations, as you could see, the green bar sort of was the root of this whole Robert descendant group for 3 or 4 generations. Excuse me. Each of the ticks along the bottom of the chart is a 30-year generation, and each color is a geography where they lived. So the blue at the bottom is 7 generations of the Boston crowd. The next is the Bristol population, each generation in green, and so forth. So anyway, I thought, well, there really is quite an interesting larger population here, but what do I actually know about them, or what could I learn about them? Many of them are in New England, and I said no idea. For instance, the largest group, the purple, which is central Maine, is by far the largest group of Robert's descendants, male descendants anyway. And I go to Maine every year of my life, and I had no idea that the cemetery was going to be so full of Reynolds tombstones. But what could I learn about these different subgroups was really what I was thinking about. And particularly, in the Rhode Island group, the first group, I had their names, but how do I kind of figure out who they were? And in that particular group, I stumbled across, this is really the first 4 or 5 generations of Robert Reynolds' descendants. I stumbled across the memoirs of one of the Boston people who was a doctor, a very well-educated guy, I think the first Reynolds that went to college. And he was born in 1793. His name was the same as mine, Edward. And he wrote a memoir, and then the first page was about his own ancestry. So I don't know how much genealogy he knew, but if you'll bear with me, I'll just read what he said about his ancestors, which is essentially the first 3 or 4 generations in America. I'm descended originally from Nathaniel Reynolds, who came from England for the enjoyment of religious liberty to the wilds of America in the days of the Holy Winthrop. He was the father of 7 sons and 1 daughter, with whom he migrated to Rhode Island, and seems to have been a man of function and substance, for he educated 1 son at Cambridge and deeded at his death a farm to each of his sons, on condition that they should each, on receiving his farm, pay to Miss Tabitha Reynolds, a spinster, £5, to which Miss Tabitha also bequeathed his valuable library, which consisted of the family Bible, The Straight Road to Heaven, and 2 other books. Nathaniel was probably a man of pluck, for he was captain of the town dragoons, and he went out to the fight of King Philip. All else that I knew of him is that he was the great progenitor of 5 generations of the American family of the Reynoldses, and the only one, as far as the records show, that knew the pleasure of going to a better world, having left an ample space in this world where each of his mourning children could plant their own pumpkins and be happy after the original planter was himself planted under the soil. The 4 succeeding generations were good men, holy men of God, upon whom fortune never seemed to shower her smiles. They were remarkable for nothing, as far as I can learn, but poverty, piety, and longevity in this world, and being gathered safely to heaven in the next. Such was the glorious root from which I sprang. So a little corny, but at least I had somebody's who was well educated in about 1850 talking about the first 5 generations. And so he knew as much as anybody knew. And he described them as hardworking, never made any money, but honest and religious. And so that was really insightful to me. So that was the kind of the green bar here. And I know I'm probably running out of time here, but I'll just talk about a couple of the other bars here. The yellow bar is Vermont. Again, I go skiing in Vermont all the time. I had no idea there were large pockets of Reynolds there, but I've since met Jim Reynolds, who's on this call, whose ancestors were in this yellow bar after they left Rhode Island. And I have every intention of going up to northern Vermont, where the Bristol crowd moved to take up farming. Jim and I have become good collaborators. We've been to Bristol together, and we're working hard on finding Robert's ancestor. I mentioned Central Maine. That's where we found cousin Jerry, who's also on this call, and others from Central Maine as well, and Northern Maine. And again, I haven't been to the towns yet, but I have every intention of visiting some of these cemeteries and seeing all these unknown distant cousins of mine, but helping me bring sort of Robert's footprint to light. The farthest northern bar is Northern Maine. We talked, I think, a little bit earlier today about, I think it was Nathaniel, the sea captain. He and his son were both sea captains out of Marblehead, but they settled eventually in Northern Maine. They were part of a large smuggling group, apparently, that was feeding the colonies during the Revolutionary War from Nova Scotia. And they would hide out in the deep coves of Northern Maine and eventually settle there from they'd hide out from the British Navy, which was chasing them. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. I'm starting to run out, but anyway, I wanted to just give you an idea of what things you could do when you have lots of data and want to have some fun thinking about patterns of where your more distant cousins have settled, and using it as a way to meet new people, find collaborators, and enjoy genealogy. So that's basically it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I like this. I really think that we should probably, like, the family groups, maybe get together and maybe a little tie more together to get a a little bit of better understanding like you just did here. So this is great.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, I'm in group 10 and we got quite a few of them. So it would be good to kind of do some of the same here.
yeah, indeed. Very, very interesting, Ned. Something unique about your group or your line is the depth, that you all can trace back. A lot of our families, taper off after 1800 or some, thereabout. So really interesting to see what you can do with a well-documented family, and a lot of information.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I want to just jump in and put a plug in for establishing a genealogical interest group. They're on the call today. We had 7 people on our breakout group, 6 of whom are members of the Robert and Mary Genealogical Interest Group. And Mike Karen, who's on the call, he expressed an interest in joining us too. And one of the benefits, Tommy, you've hosted a regional group discussion with just our group, in which we could pick your brain and you could offer suggestions, and it allows for some cross-fertilization within the group on research that is being conducted individually that we can share with one another. So it may be something that some of the other lines in the Reynolds RFA might want to think about doing, is pulling together an informal interest group or study group, whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah, I agree. There would be interest among our other groups. I know, just for the awareness of the rest of the folks on the call, another area of interest from of Ned and Jim and Jerry and the other folks that have been working with their group is to decide to find additional Y-DNA matches in the United Kingdom and to sort out some of the distant matches that they do have to people in the United Kingdom. I think you had a Hardcastle match or something similar, and to see if we could break down and advance those.
We found a Nigel Hardcastle. He's not named Reynolds, but it was pre-surnames. We think the common ancestor is around the year 1000, based on the the differences in our DNA signature.
Yeah,
and he's just been a wonderful character to get to know. He's done a lot of sort of interesting ancient genealogy. We still haven't found where Robert came from, but it's been fun to find a very distant cousin.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that he is your cousin, just the same as Jim here is your cousin. It's just a different degree.
That's right. That's right.
But you are absolutely certainly cousins of some degree.
Yep.
Okay, it's time now to wrap up this and to transition over to our next discussion. So Ned, thank you for sharing. Always appreciated. I will stop sharing this session. We'll stop